Trigger warning. This podcast episode contains discussions of emotional abuse, financial abuse, suicidal ideation, and the current Israel-Hamas war. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Emotional Abuse is Real. I'm your host, Sarene Leeds, and I'm so glad you're here. Before we get into today's episode, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that it has been a dark week and a half for many of us. The news out of Israel and Gaza is absolutely devastating, and as a Jewish person, I'm sure you can understand how deeply affected I've been since more than 1,000 people were slaughtered and kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th. If you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts on this topic, I urge you to please follow me on Instagram and Threads at Sarene Leeds Writes. That's SareneLeedsWrites. And to please subscribe to my newsletter. Links to both are in the show notes. Shifting gears, here is my weekly reminder that emotional abuse is real still needs your support. And there are several ways you can do that. First of all, if you're a listener and you'd like to share your story, please don't hesitate to reach out via Instagram at Sarene Leeds Writes, via our Emotional Abuse is Real Facebook page, or via email at hello@sereneleadswrites.com. A reminder that anonymous guests are always welcome. Another way you can support Emotional Abuse is Real is by heading over to Apple Podcasts and both leaving a rating and writing a review. The more reviews we get, the easier it is for people to find this podcast. Finally, you can support the podcast by following me on Instagram at Sarene Leeds Writes and following our Facebook page, Emotional Abuse is Real. And if you are able, please consider donating to our Buy Me a Coffee page, which I've linked in the show notes. As I've said before, this is a one-woman operation, and your donations help fund the podcast's production costs. I'd also like to remind you about my free newsletter. This is a great opportunity to stay up to date on my latest published articles as well as new podcast episodes. Also, it's a wonderful way to stay in touch with me directly, especially if you are a business or brand owner looking to punch up your website, email, or social media copy. I am available to work with you on any writing or editing you may need with your business and brand copy. Plus, as an added bonus, I send out a free delicious dessert recipe to every new subscriber. I've left the sign-up link in the show notes, and you can also subscribe directly via my website, sereneleadswrites.com. My guest for today's episode is LaShaundra Barnes. LaShaundra is a mom, a fellow podcaster, and an emotional abuse survivor. Thanks to her devout faith and years of therapy, LaShaundra has emerged from a toxic relationship with her children's father stronger than she's ever been. It is LaShaundra's hope that her story can help others realize that leaving an emotionally abusive partner is an attainable goal and that forgiveness is never impossible. I'm so honored that LaShaundra came on Emotional Abuse is Real to share her story. She truly bared her soul with me, and I could not be more grateful for her honesty or proud of her bravery. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with LaShaundra Barnes.
Hi, thank you, Sarene, for having me. My name is LaShaundra Barnes. I am a single mother of neurodiverse children. I am a faithful woman of God. I'm a Christian, so I follow Jesus Christ.
Okay.
And I am a recent college graduate, a non-traditional graduate. So I just graduated during the pandemic, pretty much. And I'm an entrepreneur, a former homeschooler, and a domestic violence survivor.
Okay. Wow. Well, First of all, congratulations on your graduation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And we talk about neurodivergent children and people here a lot on the podcast. My daughter has ADHD.
Yeah.
So
yes. I can relate. So.
I'm sure you can. I'm sure you can. So I want to open up the floor to you. If you could please tell me your domestic violence, emotional abuse story.
Sure. So, I guess going back to when I was a kid, I was really quiet, reserved to myself. I remember meeting my first boyfriend. It was junior year in high school. Like I was like 16. And so, this guy ended up, and he was very kind, very polite, such a gentleman. And we were kids at the time. But he ended up being actually later the father of my 3 children when we were older, and my former abuser now, but the guy I met when I was in high school. And so we meet at the beginning of the school year, and everything's good. But I didn't realize that he had been going through so much since his childhood, like since birth, probably. Like he was there for about a good month and a half. We got really close. And then he just left out of state, moved to a completely different state.
Wow.
And so after that, I never had closure. I felt like from that, it was like ever since he left, it was like I still wanted to complete that story.
Sure.
And so we ended up getting in contact. We would write letters to each other over the years. And we ended up reconnecting my junior year in college.
Okay.
And we decided to be in a long distance relationship then. So I remember him over the phone, we were in a long distance relationship, telling me that he was struggling mentally with his mental health and had been in and out of the hospital. But when he was telling me it, it's like I was like in denial. I'm like, no. I was kind of like still holding on to that person I met in high school. I'm like, no, I know you. The doctor can't be right. Like you don't have that. Like I don't know. So I was in complete denial. I'm like, whatever. I just ignored it.
I've been there. Yeah. No, I don't mean to interrupt, but I will say when I was in my early 20s, I dated a guy who liked to drive drunk. And I just kept telling myself, no, I love him. I'll be there for him and I can fix this.
Yeah.
Boy, was I wrong.
Anyway, because
so I get you.
You don't realize that like the help that they need goes beyond your capacity. Like,
absolutely.
You know what I mean? And I didn't understand. I was young. I didn't really understand it at that time. So I remember him telling me that. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, I'm still here, I'm going to stick with you. And so when I was in college, I think I was a senior.
Okay.
I went to go visit him because he lived in another state like the whole time. I went to go visit him. I remember, and that's when I witnessed like his first like psychotic break. Like I was able to see just how bad it was. And so, and it wasn't like he was like aggressive and violent at that point in time.
Right.
It was just more like he was like so weak and like he couldn't talk and he was pacing and he couldn't really eat. And I don't know, for some reason at that point, I was just like, man, I could really help him. Like he needs me. He's so like, and me being the person that I am is like, I love to care for people, you know what I mean? Like, and take care of people. So it's like, and he was already my friend. We had that relationship that we built over the years, and a good friendship. And so it was like, okay, like I guess he thought that was going to scare me away. But I was like, no, it's fine. I was still like in denial at how bad things were.
Yeah.
Even seeing that, it's like, no, I'm going to stick with you. I'm going to stay. And I
get that because I mean, so often with the stories that are shared on this podcast, the abuser is someone who is damaged and who needs help, and they won't get the help that they need. And we think because they're damaged, that because we love them, we can help them. And it's so hard.
It is
for us to realize that that's not our job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
exactly. And I didn't find that out till later.
No, most of us don't. And most of us
Yeah.
don't. And most of us don't. Yeah.
Yes. So, I want to kind of transition. So he
Yeah.
moved here, and I think like the first red flag for me was when I was pregnant with our son.
Hmm.
I was a senior in college,
Hmm.
about to graduate, but I ended up leaving for financial reasons.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so I had to beg him to like move here. Like I
Hmm.
had to beg and plead. He didn't actually come here until I want to say 1 or 2 months before my son was born. So like I was by myself the whole pregnancy, and
Oh, I'm so
I had to
sorry.
beg him to come here. Yeah. So it
Hmm.
was really hard. But I do want to say that, I'm not saying any of this to like speak badly of him. I'm just like
Hmm.
telling my story. Like
Yeah.
I've forgiven him and everything. Yes. So I don't
Okay.
want anyone to think like I'm like bashing him or anything. But I've forgiven him. We've kind of
Okay.
moved forward, and I have no like hate or anger or anything towards him. Like that's
Okay.
kind of where I'm at.
Good for you.
But
Yeah.
yeah, and that it takes time to do
Oh,
that.
sure. Sure.
Oh
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
So he moves here to where we were living at the time,
Hmm.
right before my son is born,
Do you mind
and
my
we
asking where that is? You don't have to share, but if you don't want to say
oh
where you are, yeah.
Illinois.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
Illinois.
Okay.
So he moves here, and so we struggled for years. Like we struggled living with different family members and things like that. Until
Sure.
finally we were able to get our own place.
Hmm.
And um, I guess over the years, it was mostly emotional and mental abuse,
Hmm.
manipulation, control, constantly calling the job like every 5 minutes.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and just feeling like I had to walk on eggshells, like
Hmm.
having so much anxiety of not wanting to set him off, not wanting to upset him, not wanting to make him mad, and like literally feeling like I had to walk on eggshells in my own house.
Sure. Sure.
So it was really difficult over the years.
Yeah.
It was emotional abuse, mental abuse. There was some financial abuse as well. And I will
Yeah.
say, yeah, I will say it's a an interesting dynamic because I was the breadwinner. I worked
Hmm.
majority of the time. Like he had jobs here and there,
Hmm.
but I was like the main source of income. And
Yeah.
for it to be financial abuse and it's like kind of flipped, it's like he didn't have the money. I did, but there was
Hmm.
still like
Financial
him taking
abuse.
it, yeah, like different things like that. So
Okay.
um I think it's important.
I'm really glad you brought that up because financial abuse does seem to find its way onto this podcast a lot because I know that in a
Mhm.
lot of cases it does go hand in hand with emotional abuse. And I've written an article about financial therapy because I didn't know
Mhm.
about financial therapy or financial abuse. So the more people who are able to share stories about the financial abuse element, I'm really grateful because that is something that I do think that we need to raise awareness of.
Yes, and I really didn't even realize it. I would say like a
Sure.
year or two ago, I realized it. And this happened like 6 or 7 years ago. So I would say like a
Mm.
year or two ago, I'm like, wait a minute, like there was financial abuse too. Like
Hmm.
it's like as you educate yourself more on the different
Yes.
forms of abuse, it's like, oh my
Yes.
goodness, like I didn't realize that I was going through this much. And I think
Yeah.
the education is key to really understand because I didn't think I was being abused like the whole time. I
Uh,
was in denial. I'm like,
Most of
and
us
people would
don't.
ask me too, like, is he hitting you and stuff like that? But
Right.
maybe people were asking the wrong questions because
It's
no, he
possible.
wasn't yet.
Yeah.
You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yes. 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 Yeah.
But there
I
were
had no
other
idea.
things.
I had no idea I was being emotionally abused until my therapist told me that I was.
And that's good that you went to therapy because
Yeah.
it helps.
It does. It does. I always say on this podcast, I am not a professional. I am not a mental health professional, but I always encourage people going through any sort of abuse, emotional, physical, get yourself to therapy. And
Yes.
there are ways for that to happen. So yeah.
Yes, I agree. I agree. And I actually did eventually go to therapy, but I'll get to
Mhm.
that in a second.
Yeah, no,
In
no,
a
sure,
second.
sure, sure. I know. I'm sorry. I keep interrupting.
Oh
I
no,
want
you're
you to
fine.
keep
You're fine.
I want you to keep telling your story. Yeah.
You're fine.
Okay.
So yeah, so I experienced like all these different kinds of abuse. And once again, I was like, no, he's not hitting me. So I'm like, okay, I'm good. Like,
Right.
where I'm not being abused. Like, and I know
Exactly.
people thought that I was, but it was more of the emotional. And, people don't really have knowledge of like what that was. I didn't.
Exactly.
So,
Yep.
so until one day I remember our pastors had came over to our house, my pastor and his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, I found out that he went to their house and he was like saying bad things about me behind my back to them.
Oh
He was like speaking
no.
bad about me and saying all kind of things. I don't know what he said, but they
Oh
did tell me
no.
later. And they were like, no, something's not right. Let's go over and see what's going on. Like,
I'm so happy that your pastor knew to do that,
Mhm.
that he and his wife weren't just like, okay, well then she's terrible. Like, I'm so glad that they heard what he said and they were skeptical and they came to talk to you. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Good.
And I love them so much because
Mhm.
they didn't even really know me like that. I had
Oh
just started
wow.
going to their church. I just met them a couple months. And the fact that
Ah,
they
okay.
went out of their way, you know what I mean, to come and check to see if I was okay. It's like,
That's a good sign.
yeah, yeah,
That's a very good
absolutely.
sign. Yeah.
So they came over there and it was like a therapy session almost. Like,
Ah, good.
they were just
Good.
listening to what was going on. They're like, what's the problem? Like, they were asking us questions. And of course, he's like being kind of rude, saying all kind of stuff. I don't even remember what he was saying. And
Ah.
at one point in the conversation, my pastor's wife, she was like, that's verbal abuse. And I don't know why I always remember that. A
Good for
light bulb went
her.
off in
Yeah.
me. And I'm like, she's right. And it was like from
Mhm.
that point on, I started to find out the different types of abuses I had been experiencing that I didn't even have knowledge of. And it was
Mhm.
like from there, I kind of slowly but surely was beginning to, depart and leave that situation because
Yeah.
it just got more and more toxic from that point on.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So what happened next? How were you able to leave?
Okay.
How did you leave rather?
I
Yeah.
want to share a story because it's like such
Please.
a crazy buildup.
We
so
like stories here. We do.
So one day we went on a drive. We
Okay.
were in our van with our three kids in the back. They had to be like 2, 3, and 4. Like they
Mm,
were really young.
young. Yeah.
And so I think we were looking for a place to live. Like we were going to like a new area, looking for like a new apartment or something like that. And so we had drove, I want to say like an hour away from where we were. Um, and it was like an unfamiliar area for me. And so it was getting late. I know I didn't have like a charger. My phone was about to die and it
Yeah.
was getting dark. And I don't like driving like in areas I don't know at night.
Especially and yeah, you don't know if they're lit. Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so I
Yeah,
was
I
like,
get
okay,
that.
can we turn around and go back home? And for some reason, he had like
Yeah.
a bad attitude. I was driving and he was
Uh-huh.
in the passenger seat. And for some
Okay.
reason, he had like an attitude. He was just sitting there. And eventually he was like, okay, let's just go home. Let's just go home.
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, good. Let me find a street to like turn around so we can go home. So I'm just driving, and I see a street on the right side. And I make a right turn, and out of nowhere, he just explodes. Like he loses it. What are you doing? Where are you going? He's like screaming. I'm like
Oh no.
you just said to go home. We're going home, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so I think we're like going back and forth. I'm like, are you okay? Like, what's the problem? So I pull over to the side of the road,
Mhm.
and he's like yelling, and we're kind of going back and forth in front of the kids, mind you. And I'm like, what's the problem? And he slaps me in the face, and the kids are
Yeah.
back there, and I'm like,
Yeah. Okay.
and he was like, basically, just let me drive, let me drive. And that was like the worst decision I could have made. So I get
Mhm.
out of the driver's seat and I let him drive.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, why did you have to slap me? The kids are back there.
Yeah.
And he said, because you wouldn't shut up, basically. And
Mhm.
so
Yeah. Mm.
we began driving,
Mhm.
and he's like driving like erratically. He like swerving the
Oh,
wheel and doing stuff. We're arguing back and forth. And me, I'm like, okay, let me just be quiet. I just want to get home safely. I want the kids to get home safely. Let me just
of
be
course.
quiet. Let me not say anything.
Okay.
And then I remember at one point he pulls over and he's like, get out the car. I'm going to fight you like a man.
Oh,
get
good.
out of the car. And I'm like, no, I'm not getting out this car. So
Yeah.
you can pull off and leave me with my kid.
Right.
No.
Right.
So I didn't get out. So he pulled,
Good.
I think like he pulled over like once or twice and said that. I did not get out. I'm like, let's just go home. Let's just go home.
Hmm.
And then at one point, um, he begins speeding, like driving extremely
Hmm.
fast. And I look up a couple feet ahead of us. There's like cars. It's a red light. Cars are stopped ahead. He begins to accelerate faster and faster and
Hmm.
faster and faster. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, and I just break down and started to cry. I felt so
Yeah.
helpless, but what made
Sure.
me more sad was like the kids were in the
The
back of the
kids were
car
there.
crying.
Ugh.
They were crying. And I just didn't know what to do. I thought I was going to die. I didn't know.
Yeah.
So I just started crying. And thank
Sure.
God he like stops in time before we get to the cars. But I think at that point, I'm like, okay, like this is getting ridiculous. So I believe I tried to leave that night,
Hmm.
but he convinced me to stay.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, you need to get help. Like, I can't stay here and you're like, you need help. You need therapy, counseling, like anger management, something. You need it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So he promised to get it. And so the next day we went to like a little center or whatever. But, they have waiting lists that are always long
Yeah. Yeah.
for
Yeah.
him to sign up for services. And so he stayed. And
Hmm.
at that point, I was like, oh my goodness. Like, I think I was slowly like gathering resources at that point because I was
Yeah.
like halfway out the door.
Because that's all you can do. Yeah.
Yeah.
As much as you may have wanted to leave that night, it's not always feasible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think people realize like how many barriers there are,
Hmm.
when you
Hmm.
have to leave, especially when you have kids.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Just you have to start over from ground, like with nothing. And
Yeah.
that's really, really hard to consider. So all those things are going through your mind. And it's like, it's almost easier to stay in a predictable situation than to leave in fear and not know like what you're going to do, what's next, without the
Correct.
resources that you need. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's kind of where I was at. I was overthinking pretty much
Yeah. Yeah.
and
No,
just
and I'm glad you
afraid.
said all those things because I know that so many people, we talk about it a lot on this podcast, so many people do stay because of the fear of the unknown or
Mhm.
because they're financially dependent. I mean, I know that that wasn't the case for you, but there are so many reasons because I think it's really important because I was the same way for a really long time. I would always just be like, why don't you just leave? And it's not that
Mhm.
easy. So that's why I want stories like yours and
Yeah.
perspectives like yours so people can better understand that, yes, leaving a toxic situation is possible, but it's not that easy, at least not in the
Mhm.
beginning.
Yes, absolutely. So he
Yeah.
actually left at one point. I don't know
Mm.
why, but he
Hmm.
chose to leave. So he
Okay.
moved out of our apartment and he went to like a shelter or something. I don't know.
Okay.
Um, and at one point, I got an order of protection against him.
Okay.
Right.
Good.
And so he leaves. And I remember it was like in the winter and I was so depressed. I remember
Mm.
like my birthday is a week before Christmas.
Hmm.
I remember it was my birthday and I was staring out the window
Sure.
and I was so sad. I was so depressed
Of
and
course.
it was
Yeah.
just really hard for me at that
Yeah,
time.
absolutely. I don't blame you.
And
Yeah.
so he
Yeah.
leaves. But one day like the doorbell rings and
Hmm.
it's him.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I just felt so bad. It was almost Christmas. He wanted to be there for the kids
Yeah.
for Christmas. And it was freezing outside. Like he had
Hmm.
walked like through 3 cities, like in the winter.
Wow.
In the winter and it was
Yeah.
cold. He was like, "Are you gonna let me in? It's cold." So
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
like that play on like guilt and stuff like that. Like I let him
Yeah.
come back and just
Yeah.
wanting the kids to be able to be around their dad for Christmas. I allowed him to come back, but I should not
Yeah.
have done that because
Hmm.
it got way worse after that. And so
Hmm.
he comes back. He convinces me to go to the courthouse. To lift the order of protection. So we
Yeah.
actually,
I
yeah,
was
I
going to
know.
ask about
This
that.
is,
Yeah.
it gets crazier. Trust me. Like, this is just the
I believe,
beginning.
no, I believe it. I believe it.
So,
I mean, nothing surprises me in life at all, but that doesn't mean that none of this isn't devastating.
yeah, absolutely. So he convinced me to go back to the courthouse We go together. He stays in the car, of course, because, we
Okay.
go together. And so I lift the order of protection, and then he basically like moves back in.
Yeah.
And that wasn't a good choice at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
So that was a December. So by February, I was back in the courthouse to get another one.
Yeah.
And so what led up to that was, I want to mention this first.
Mhm.
So I remember us going to the grocery store one day, and he was for some reason running around with the kids, being silly, like screaming, being loud. And I don't know why, but I had a lot of anxiety. Like I was like very anxious, and I did not feel like myself. I didn't feel well. And so I think I asked him, like, "Can you guys like just settle down so we can like get in the store and get out, like just relax."
Yeah.
And of course he didn't listen. He's running around screaming with the kids. They're running after him, laughing all through the aisles. And I'm just like, oh, I just want to go home. I didn't want to be around people. I didn't, because I was like very anxious at the moment. And so I think at one point he ends up leaving me in the store by myself, like at one point. And yeah. And so I remember walking around the store, and I felt like everyone was like looking at me like I was crazy. Like, it's like every person that I passed had like this weird look on, and they were looking at me, and I'm like, I just already didn't want to be there.
Sure.
And so
Sure.
I was like, let's just, we ended up leaving, going home.
Yeah.
When we get home, I questioned him. I'm like, him out of all people knows how it feels to like feel a certain way emotionally, mentally inside, to not want to be around people. I was like, I was feeling very anxious. I didn't want to be in the store. I just wanted to get what we needed to get and leave. I guess I was questioning about like, why didn't you listen? Relax with the kids so we can go. And he said this to me. He was like, me and the kids, we were in the store having fun. He says, everyone in the store was looking at you like you were crazy. And after he said that, I like blacked out. I completely, because I started to believe that, because remember I told you, like, I felt like everybody was, but I'm a type of person, like how I feel is on my face. So maybe I had a certain look on my face. People were like, well, what is she okay? But I felt like he was right. And so he had asked me for like some pain medication and ibuprofen or whatever. And so I had gave it to him before that happened, before he said that to me. And after he said that, I took the pills and I like snatched it. I walked in the kitchen and I threw the pills all over the kitchen counter. And it's like I kind of blacked out, but I did want to take the pills. I did was contemplating like committing suicide at that point. And it's still hard for me to remember. I know I threw the pills all over the kitchen. I don't know if I was actually putting them in my mouth or imagining it. Like I literally lost sense of reality in that moment. But I know that I was this close to committing suicide at that point. And so he calls the ambulance and the medics checked me out and everything. And I agreed to go with them to the emergency room. So I go. He shows up a little later with the kids, and then he says, "This is us," basically. He says, "Don't tell your family or anyone about this situation," basically. He says, "This is us. Like, this is our business." Like, he didn't want me to tell anyone. And I'm pretty sure, like, if I did, they'd be like, "What? Like, leave that." Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's, but that was another way for him to, like, have that control, I feel like, and make me feel like I just have you. I don't have anyone else to go to. I feel like, So I've never shared that publicly. So I really wanted to like share that because I feel like it's important.
It
because
is.
even though I hadn't been like physically hidden and abused like to such a great extent, that mental and emotional abuse is so toxic. It could lead you to suicide. Literally.
Absolutely.
It could lead you to think that you're crazy, or you could begin struggling with your mental health and things like that. So I just wanted to share that story.
Thank you for your bravery in sharing that story, because that is very, very, very important for our listeners to hear, because it is absolutely true. It's the fact that you had those thoughts, you felt driven to even consider it, And also the fact that he wanted to keep the secret.
Yeah.
That just
Yeah.
made it 100 times worse. And I'm sorry that that happened to you.
Thank
But
you. Yeah.
thank you for sharing that part of your story.
Yes, no problem.
Of
I feel like
course,
that's important. People need to
it's
know
very
that.
important. Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
important. Okay.
So, what ends up happening after the emergency room is I I think I want to say that they gave me like a referral to therapy.
Good. Okay.
And so it was like an intensive outpatient 6-week program.
Yeah.
It was like more like a group therapy, which I loved because it
Mhm.
helps so much.
Yeah.
But what was interesting to me is like the whole time I was in therapy, right? I didn't really bring up what was going on at home or him or anything. It was like I was dealing with other
Interesting.
stuff, but
Uh-huh.
I did not bring up because he was still living with me at the time. He
Right.
was still in the house, and
Mhm.
it didn't come up to like the very end of the 6 weeks of therapy that I had to tell the therapist that, hey, I have to leave today and get an order of protection because they didn't
Mhm.
even know that it was going on,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So at the very end of my therapy, I had to get another order of protection. The reason is because one day, I know I wanted to go to the store. He had totaled our car like the day before. He totaled the car, so we didn't have a car. And
Yeah.
so I wanted to go to the store. I know the older two kids were at school, and
Mhm.
the youngest one, he was 2, so he was at home
Mhm.
with us. I
Mhm.
had wanted to go to the store to get food before they came home from school.
Sure.
And he would often take my phone, take the car keys, take my bank card, and would not give it back. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
this particular day, he took my bank card and I believe my phone. I don't know. He took a couple things from me, and I was just requesting for him to give it back. I'm like, hey, I want to go to the store. I want to get food before the other two kids get home.
Yeah.
And of course, I had to walk because he totaled the car. And he would not give it to me for some reason.
Mhm. Mm.
And I took it upon myself to try to like reach into his pocket and just grab it so I can go. Like, I'm like,
Yeah.
it's mine. Can I have it? And at that point, I think he like smacks my hand away.
Mhm.
And we begin like physically fighting
Yeah.
from the kitchen to like the living room. We both fall on the floor.
Mhm.
And I remember him, and mind you, my son is asleep in the living room, the 2-year-old on the couch. And we both fall on the floor. And at one point, he gets on top of me, and I'm like face down on the
Mhm.
floor.
Mhm.
And he put me in like a headlock, and he's like
Mm.
making these gestures with his hands, like he wants to snap my neck.
Yeah.
And he's like a pretty solid guy, like he's pretty heavy. And so he was putting all this pressure on my neck, and I couldn't breathe. And so I just felt at this point with my face to the floor, he's on my back and he has me in a headlock. I was trying to reach up and fight, but you can't really do
You
much
can't.
at that point.
No.
And I could not breathe. And I kept telling him, I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
literally felt like life was slipping away from me. I've never
Sure.
felt closer to dying in my life.
Mhm.
And it was a traumatic experience for
Of
me. And
course.
so he kept saying, are you going to leave me alone? Are you going to leave me alone? And I was just like, yeah, like, get off of me, please.
Whatever it takes.
Yes, absolutely. And I was like, if you could please just get off me. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. So when he gets off, I end up calling the police.
Good.
And so they come, and they're like questioning me, and they're like, hey, do you want to, want us to arrest him? Do you want us to,
Mhm.
what do you want
Mhm.
us to do? And
Yeah.
me overthinking, I'm like, no. And
Mhm.
the reasoning is because my oldest child, she's adopted.
Mhm.
I adopted her.
Mhm.
Now all 3 of my kids have the same father, but she has
Mhm.
a different mom. And for
Mm.
other reasons, concerning like neglect and things like that with her
Sure.
biological mother, she
Okay.
moved with us.
Mhm.
And so the reason why I didn't want to is because I didn't have any legal rights to her, and she couldn't go
Mhm.
back to her bio mom.
Yeah.
And this is her bio dad, the only 2 people that have rights to her. And I didn't
Yeah.
want her to end
Yeah.
up in child protective services,
Of course.
foster care. I was
Of
just thinking about
course.
all of that. I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah.
no, don't, and
Of
that was the
course.
main reason why I was like, no, like I was trying to figure out how am I going to do this, because I
Yeah.
wanted to continue to care for her because she had
Hmm.
been living
Hmm.
with us for about a year at
Of
that
course.
point.
Yeah.
And so they don't arrest him that day. He ends up giving me my card. I take my son, I leave, I go to the store.
Yeah.
Later on that day, though, the police is called again. All the other
Hmm.
two kids are home from school.
Hmm.
And so he wouldn't give me the phone so I can call anyone to come get me or anything. He was withholding my phone.
Yeah.
So I just go to the neighbor's house and I use her phone to call the police. And so the police come. I want to leave, but before then, he's like barricading the kids in the room, saying, "Why are you doing this in front of them? Like I'm the bad
Hmm.
person." You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
Of course.
and
Of
so
course. Yeah.
exactly. And so I end up calling the police. They come, and
Hmm.
so I leave with the two boys because I, don't have legal rights to her, so I
Yeah.
had to leave her. And so the police come, and I was going to go to a shelter, but I end up going to like a family member's house,
Okay.
and
I'm
it
glad. I'm
was
glad you were able to go to a family member's house.
yes,
Good.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it was really hard,
Sure.
but that was like it for me. It was like
Hmm.
after like he put me in a headlock, it was like
Yeah.
okay, like what is it going to take for me to leave this? Like, do I have
Yeah.
to lose my life, my sanity, to my kids? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I was like, that was it. So that
Yeah.
same day, I think, or the next day, I'm sorry, I the next day I go to the courthouse to get an order of protection, and I go to
Hmm.
the police station to file a police report. Now
Hmm.
he does get arrested, but they release him,
Okay.
and their reasoning was, I waited till the next day to file the report, which it's like if you look at like the psychology of like what people go, when they go through stuff like this, it's
Yeah.
not uncommon to wait. You know what I
Of
mean?
course. Of
So,
course.
and then there weren't any physical marks on my body, but once again, emotional, mental abuse, and the minimal physical portion that happened at the
Yeah.
end. Yeah, so that's why they released him. And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
they arrest him, they release him, and then at one point I did have his daughter, but I had to give her back once again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and he's like he's not in a good mental state. He's not taking care of his health and doing what the doctor is asking him to do.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
yeah, it was not good. So after that I left.
Hmm.
I got that order of protection and it stayed in place for 4 years. And
Hmm.
eventually I ended up adopting his daughter.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. That was going to be my next question. Yeah, if
Yeah.
you were able to do, oh, that's wonderful. I'm so happy that you were able to do that. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm only asking this question from a legal standpoint. Were the two of you ever married?
No, we were not.
Okay.
No.
All right. So
And it's
were there any other legal um, hoops that you had to jump through?
oh yes.
Okay. I
Absolutely.
figured. Yeah. Yeah.
Goodness.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was a lot. So I got guardianship of her at first, and then I had temporary custody.
Hmm.
Then
Hmm.
once bio mom agreed to allow me to have temporary custody, I'm like, okay, I'm going for adoption. And it's like I had to. And it went so quickly. Like I had adopted her like within a year.
Oh, that's
Yeah. And it was a hard
wonderful. That's wonderful.
yes.
You was able to go so quickly. Oh my God.
I'm telling you, and it was
Wow.
hard because I had attorneys, and at
Hmm.
one point I was representing myself. I didn't have an
Hmm.
attorney like through everything except for like the adoption. I got an
I
attorney for
hear
that.
that so much about how people, even for some of the time end up having to represent themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but
Yeah.
the attorneys are like, "Hey, it looks like you're very organized. You have everything together. Like, pretty much, what do you need me for?" I'm like, "Oh, okay." Like,
That's great.
I got so many compliments from like the judges and other attorneys and stuff like that, and they were like, "Oh, you
Uh-huh.
have it all together, like you." And the fact that they were like, "I honor what you're doing, judges.
Yeah.
I honor what you're doing. I see your
Oh,
heart. Thank you so much." It's like I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do. Wouldn't anyone else do this? Like, but that's just
exactly.
the type of person that I am. And so
You're a
there was
good, you're
that.
a
There
good
was
mother.
yeah, there
You
was
are a good
that, and then
mother. You are.
there was making sure that I have like they call it allocation of parental rights of my other
Hmm.
two sons.
Yeah.
So I have that, and then another order of protection, and then like there was so
It's a
much.
lot.
I'm
Just
glad
a
all
lot.
that is like over because it was a lot. It was a lot. And I was going against biological, mind you, I was going
Yeah.
against, I'm not related in any way, biological
Right.
mom and biological
Yeah.
dad. Glory be to
Yeah.
God. And I still, he made a way to allow me to make sure that I had her in the best environment, because going with either wasn't that great.
No.
Yeah.
It just, I mean, I don't have, I have your side of the story. I'm trying to take in all the facts, but already it sounds like you are the best parent for your daughter, because
Yeah.
that's what she is. She is your daughter to be
Yes.
with.
Yes.
You are.
Thank
You
you.
are. So I am so happy to hear that worked out. And I mean, your story is just absolutely incredible. And I'm so grateful that you're here telling it and, providing inspiration to others. So you said it, so it's been about 4 years since everything ended.
Yes.
Okay.
It was it was actually 2017.
Okay. So
So,
it's been about 6. Okay.
yep. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about your healing, what
Yes.
you did, your therapy, your church. I want to hear about how all of those things have helped you.
Okay. So I always say my way of escape was my relationship with Jesus Christ. Like,
Mhm.
even when I was in that relationship with him, I had been praying. I'm like, okay,
Sure.
God, fix this, change this, like, change me, make me a better wife, even though I wasn't his wife. And
Yeah.
it's interesting, like, we were engaged for
Hmm.
3 years. We were together
Hmm.
for 5, and 3 out of the 5 years we were engaged
Hmm.
and never got married. We had
Yeah.
our marriage license and everything, never got married,
Hmm.
but I'm glad
Yeah.
that that
Yeah.
didn't happen.
And you
So,
still have to go through all of that. You still have to jump through all of those legal hoops. It does not matter. It does not matter.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I had been praying, and I really believe that that was my way of escape. My relationship with Jesus
Mhm.
Christ, me, like, never cease praying, me praying throughout the whole situation. I know He heard every prayer, saw every
Mhm.
tear that I cried, and just my faith in really believing that I was going to be okay, even though I did not have a plan, even
Mhm.
though I had to break my lease and I was a single mother of 3
Mhm.
kids
Yeah.
overnight and start completely over. That faith to, like, leave and stay away, um, that's really what saved my life as well. So,
Yeah.
um, at a period of time, I hadn't been in church or anything like that. Like,
Mhm.
I was literally healing and trying to get back to the place where I could be in that community.
Mhm.
But I did go to therapy. My kids went to therapy. I
Good.
recommend it. It
Yeah.
helps, especially if you've been through, like, some really traumatic things in life. It really helps you. It helps you have a different perspective. It helps you to better understand yourself, why you think the way you think and do the things you do,
Yeah.
and just to heal from the abuse and understand that it wasn't your fault, that you're not crazy. You're
Yes.
not crazy despite what they try to convince you of. You are not
Mhm.
crazy. And so, years of therapy for me and my children.
Sure.
We still even get services, and as needed throughout life, we will
Mhm.
continue to get those services.
Good.
At one point, I did return back to church, and I really value that. And that's something that I prayed for, was like a godly community that I can go to. And eventually I did go back, and they are so loving, kind, and supportive. I've been
So
very open about just my story and testimony and things like that. Like, I've always shared it. I'm not ashamed of
good.
it, because everything I went through, I understand that it was for a purpose and for a reason, and it's going to be able to help someone else. And
No doubt.
if I can do that by sharing just what I've gone through to maybe help someone else not make the same mistakes or understand, like, those red flags, then that's what I'm on this earth to do. And so, yeah, I've been very open about that. They've been very kind, very supportive, and I love them. To this day, I'm with the
I'm so
same
glad to hear
people.
that. I am so glad to hear
Yeah.
that, because I know that not every religious community will be that supportive. I mean,
Hmm.
I mean, it all varies. I
Yeah.
mean, so you were very, very, very lucky to find your church community that supports
Yes.
you. I'm so
Yes.
happy to hear that. That's
Yes.
wonderful. Yeah, I mean, on that note, I know that I have a lot of listeners who they're starting to realize that they're in a bad situation, but they don't
Mm-hmm.
quite know what those first steps should be. What advice would you give to anyone who's listening who knows in the back of their mind that they're in an emotionally abusive or a physically abusive relationship? They know that it's not a good situation. What
Yes.
advice would you give? Yeah.
My advice would be to tell someone else. I think whether it's a therapist seeking help through that avenue, your church community,
Mm-hmm.
or a trusted family member, tell someone, because a lot of times you feel isolated. You feel like you're crazy. Like, am I really going through this? Is it really that bad? But just having a different perspective, and especially like a professional that can really help you navigate that. And the solution might not always be, well, just leave now. But
Yeah.
each time that those people speak into your life, it's like they're planting a seed. They're providing resources. They're building you up. They're helping you to rebuild your confidence and things like that, to be able to get to the point where you can leave because you
Yeah.
feel like, okay, I have everything I need. Or maybe you don't have everything you need, but just mentally you're in a better space to where, okay, I understand I don't deserve this. I understand there's better out there. Let me leave at this point. So I would say the first step would just be to tell someone to get help, whether it's counseling or therapy, find a godly community, or tell a trusted family member or friend.
You've been so open, but I just want to give you one more opportunity if there's anything else that you'd like to share.
Yes.
Okay.
I want to share the part of like co-parenting when like the parent is like your former abuser.
Please do.
And what that looks like. It's not easy. Okay.
No.
It's extremely hard. At one point, they had him in contact with him for 4 years of their life. And it was necessary because he needed to heal and get help, and we needed to heal and get help as well. And so I would just say forgiveness is so important, and that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
It takes time. But forgiveness is important because you never want to be bound and you never want to be hindered in life because of what someone else said or did to you.
Yeah.
And I really honestly and truthfully believe that forgiveness is for you. It's for you so that you can move on with your life and you can thrive in life after abuse.
And so do the kids have a relationship with their father now?
They do now. They just started speaking to him back in 2021.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So recently. So they're rebuilding that relationship and trust. And as far as the parenting is like, we're not together anymore, but we do what we have to do for the kids so that, they can rebuild that relationship.
Like I said before, I think that your story is going to give so many people a lot of hope. So I just want to thank you so much. And just to wrap up, how can people connect with you if you want to offer a website, social media? Yes,
I actually have a podcast, and
excellent.
It's called Her Desired Haven Podcast.
Okay.
It's on all the platforms and as well as YouTube. And I have a website. It's herdesiredhaven.com.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'll leave links to both in the show notes. And I figured you did because you got all the equipment. So
I'm prepared.
You are prepared. LaShaundra, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much. And
thank you.
Yeah, really, thank you again.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for listening to my conversation with LaShaundra Barnes on Emotional Abuse is Real. If you would like to connect with LaShaundra or check out her podcast, Her Desired Haven, I've left links in the show notes. If you would like to share your own emotional abuse story here on the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out at hello@sereneleadsrights.com, via our Facebook page, Emotional Abuse is Real, or through Instagram at Serene Leads Rights. Please note that this podcast should not be used as a substitute for professional mental health services. If you are a victim of emotional abuse and need help, please call or text the Suicide and Crisis Hotline at 988. or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You can also text START, START, to 88788. Once again, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook. Sign up for my free newsletter. And if you can, please support us through our Buy Me a Coffee page. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.